We are seeing reinforced in the recent primary election results. This is really over the past weeks and even months, what can be called the Maga-fication of the Republican Party, the Maga-fication of the GOP. Now, this is something that the left is in some ways terrified of, but in some cases, as we'll see, the left is pushing it. And by pushing it, I mean the left has the idea that some of the MAGA candidates are not as strong in the opinion of the left and of the Democrats as Republican establishment candidates. And so the Democrats themselves are trying to get some of these MAGA candidates to the forefront because they think that they would be easier to defeat in a general election. Whether or not that will prove to be the case, we will see. Now, what do we mean by the Maga-fication of the GOP? Basically, we really mean two things. One, we mean that the GOP is embracing the Trump ideology. And the Trump ideology, by the way, is not radically different from, let's say, the Reagan ideology of the 1980s. It is strong in foreign policy. It is free market oriented in economics, and it supports conservative and traditional values in social policy. There's no radical difference. The difference is more nuanced. A disengagement from expensive and costly and fruitless foreign wars, a recognition that trade should be in the benefit of America. It's not away with the old assumption that trade is beneficial no matter what. And the real difference, I think, between the MAGA types and the traditional Republican types is on the issue of style. The MAGA movement is based on the idea that we're not living in the Reagan era. We're in a much more troubling moment that calls for much more alert, vigilant, tougher tactics. In some cases, we have to do to the left what they're doing to us. So this is what we mean by the MAGA phenomenon. Now, for the left, it's all about the 2020 election. That's who the MAGA people are, election deniers. That may be a component in the sense that because the MAGA Republicans are tougher, they're not willing to let bygones be bygones in the traditional Republican way. Now, we've seen two important local, well, by local I mean state, elections just occurred. In New Hampshire, the state Senate president, a guy named Chuck Morse, mainstream Republican establishment type, defeated by a retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Don Bolduc. And Bolduc is a Trumpster, although interestingly, Trump wasn't active in the campaign. He didn't have a rally in New Hampshire. But nevertheless, running on the Trump banner, Bolduc won. And then in a congressional race, very interestingly, we saw another big win. And that is Matt Mowers, defeated by Caroline Leavitt. I'm going to try to get Caroline Leavitt on the podcast. She's a 25-year-old. And the interesting thing here is that Matt Mowers is not a bad guy. In fact, he's a little bit of a Trumpster himself. And as CNN describes it, it's kind of funny. She goes, while Matt Mowers, quote, said he had confidence in New Hampshire elections, not necessarily in national elections, but New Hampshire elections, Caroline Leavitt said she believed the 2020 election was undoubtedly stolen. Mowers said that he wanted to have hearings, Republican hearings, to decide if Biden should be impeached. Leavitt said, unquestionably, he should be impeached. So you're basically dealing here with Matt Mowers, who I'm going to call push, and Caroline Leavitt, who is essentially shove, or kind of a harder push. And who wins? Leavitt wins. So now we have all these kind of MAGA candidates. And by the way, we're thinking here about Herschel Walker in Georgia. We're thinking of Blake Masters in Arizona. Of course, in gubernatorial races, Kerry Lake. In Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz. In Ohio, J.D. Vance. Now, again, the Democrats seem to think, well, these are not the strongest candidates. It remains to be seen. Walker, although he was for a while there really trailing Warnock, has now gone past him. Blake Masters is still a little behind, I believe, But catching up, that's a close race, and I think Masters will win it. Dr. Oz, again, I think a little bit of a problematic candidate, but I think he's still going to beat Fetterman. We're going to wait and see. This is not, I don't claim any expertise in this. I'm a spectator as like everyone else. And I think J.D. Vance will win in Ohio. Now, interestingly, in Ohio, the Democrat is trying to play like he's a moderate. He's actually quite conservative. But no, this is a guy who's voted consistently with Biden. His conservatism, his moderation is completely a mirage. Trumpsters have basically been sweeping the primaries. This is what I mean by the Maga-fication of the GOP. There are only a couple of cases where someone who voted against Trump or voted to impeach Trump has made it. David Valadao of California, Dan Newhouse of Washington State, Lisa Murkowski hasn't made it to the Senate, but she has made it to the final round. And notice that she did it in a very strange kind of primary in which everybody in the state could vote. There was no distinction between parties, and the top vote getters basically make it to the final. But in any normal primary situation, it's virtually impossible to go against Trump. And that shows you where the sort of heart of the Republican Party is. So the party is changing, maybe more slowly than we would wish. But we are seeing the emergence of a new and indeed Maga-fied Republican Party.